Hello, Madhav.
Hi Vedant.
क्या हाल है? Okay. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. Madhav is officially the third guest of this podcast, which hopefully thousands of people are watching. How did I meet Madhav? I don't even remember. कैसे मिले थे हम?
I remember I ran into you in the library cafe. You asked me what I do, and as always, I advertise for the archives. That's what I end up doing to all first year undergraduate students. I hope I'm not doing the same for UG 28. By the time, I hope before that, I'm able to find a grad school which is willing to take me.
With that said, you have already been to grad school, so I'm hopeful for your grad school prospects, your PhD. But as you said, you work in the archive department. So for those watching, this conversation is going to be revolve around college, how to make the most out of your undergraduate years, how to get the most out of graduate school, social anxiety, which a lot of youngsters today seem to deal with, including myself sometimes, and just about Gandhi, because he's a pretty interesting character, and Madhav knows a lot about Gandhi, so we're going to dive into that as well. So let's start with the college. So, Madhav, you began your studies in Hindu college
Yes.
at Delhi University, and you BA'd in history.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, most students in India, at least the sane ones, they choose engineering, which is to say, it's still looked down upon to major in the arts, that people say, because it's not employable. At least that's what they claim. It doesn't teach you real practical skills which will help you earn money. Now, of course, that's a myth, because we see countless examples of people majoring in these subjects and not just earning a lot, but leading a fulfilling life, which is ultimately the purpose of whatever we're doing here, right? So I think just to take that bold of a decision, so a lot of students watch. So I've had a lot of conversations on campus with students where they're nervous to major in their area of interest, just because they think they won't earn money or they won't be financially stable. And so what was that a worry for you, employability, or not finding a job after college, or just the fact that history is looked down upon by other people?
I think to begin with, I was never very good at thinking about practical questions. And maybe that's why I'm here in the first place. But on a more serious note, I think there was a very supportive environment at home. My own father was a professor of English literature at Punjab University.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up in an environment where reading was encouraged. There were a lot of resources for reading. I remember there were 6-7 newspapers that used to come at home. I had access to good journals like the Economic and Political Weekly and Frontline. There was a huge library that I had at home, and you could, dip into perhaps whatever your interest was, whether it was philosophy, whether it was literature, whether it was history. And I remember my father getting me Ranajit Guha's Small Voice of History when I was in 12th grade. So he saw that I was inclined, or I liked the subject, and he encouraged that interest as well.
Uh-huh.
And the first time I really fell in love with Cleo, who happens to be the goddess of history, is when I read this very seminal text by E.H. Carr called What is History? And that, more than being a text on history, because see, most people's entry point into history is stories about the past, reading about kings and queens and battles, maybe. Although that notion of history has undergone a dramatic change.
Right.
But it was a text about the philosophy of history,
As in how do you approach history?
It was a text about whether history as a discipline can make truth claim. What is the nature of historical knowledge?
Interesting.
And that really got me fascinated. And I thought, here are questions that can preoccupy me for a long time, I remember sitting down with that book and taking copious notes as a 16-year-old. And that was a big deal for a 16-year-old, And so I thought, this is a subject worth studying. I never thought whether I'd get anything in return, whether I'd end up as a, big shot historian, or if I'd have enough money to sustain myself. The idea was that here is something which really fascinates me, and I must study it. That was the impulse.
So just the curiosity that you got from it, or that you had for history, made you pursue the field.
That's true. The curiosity, and as a 5-year-old once told me, this 5-year-old who was then 5-year-old.
He's not still 5.
He's not still
Yes.
5. Yes.
15 सालों से 5 years.
So he once said something remarkable. He said, Madhav, curiosity is the driver of knowledge. And that statement, stayed with me for quite some time. And I feel, if there are questions which really preoccupy you, which questions to which you can devote hours and hours thinking about them, reading about them, refining them, then I think there's something there which perhaps which needs further nurturing.
Yeah.
And it's that essentially that I have tried to do throughout my engagement with the discipline over the years while studying it as well. I've engaged with allied fields of history, museums, and heritage management, and now I'm working in the archives. So I think exploring the different facets of history as a discipline is what kind of fascinates me. I have my own kind of choices as far as the fields and the periods of history that I'm that interest me, but that's a separate conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people who either study history or are planning on studying history have a lot of misconceptions about what history is and what majoring in history can look like. As I'm sure when you read that book and then you went off to college, you're like, there may have been some courses that are like, this isn't exactly what I want to focus on right now. I want to focus on this aspect of history. But you can't do that because you're in a fixed curriculum, following a fixed curriculum. So for those, actually it reminds me of a quote by Edgar Dijkstra. He's a Dutch computer scientist. And the quote is something along those lines of, computer science is as much about computers as astronomy is about telescopes. So you're confusing the field for its tools. And I'm sure in the case of history, there are a bunch of misconceptions that students have. That history is about X or it's about Y, it's about dates, it's about figures, it's about scavenging. I don't know. Maybe that's a misconception. So I think for those who are planning on majoring in history, what would you wish they know before they make that decision?
That's a very good question. I think suggest, this is a very generic suggestion, not a very specific one, but I would suggest that a student who's perhaps in high school and would like to take history up for honors and further should read as widely as possible, read as many different kinds of history as possible. So let's say if political history appeals to you, try reading social history, the history of workers and peasants. If you're an Indian history person, try reading about the history of Africa. If you're fascinated by ancient Indian history, perhaps, then try reading a bit about archaeology and epigraphy.
What's epigraphy?
Epigraphy is a study of inscriptions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Inscriptions. Okay.
Yeah. So try reading as widely as possible, because history, I think, above all else, is also encountering that which is not familiar. It's encountering the unfamiliar. And therefore, familiarizing yourself with multiple histories is the best way of nurturing that historical imagination, if I can use that word. So I think that would be one. Second advice would be
exploring different kinds of history.
Histories. Second would be try learning different languages, right? Because as you pursue history, especially at the postgraduate level or at the research level, you'd realize that you encounter sources in different languages depending on the period that you're working in. If you're working on ancient Indian history, then Sanskrit becomes important. If you're working on medieval history, then Persian is important. And some historians are brave enough to even learn European languages. So the earlier you start this language learning process, the better equipped you'd be, to handle sources in different languages.
Right. And this comes in play during graduate work, usually, I'm assuming.
Yes, during your
the use of
master's or even your MPhil or PhD. MPhil has become defunct now.
Yeah.
But especially during your PhD, it's essential during your PhD to conduct archival research and consult sources in multiple languages.
In fact, when I arrived on campus a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to Madhav and he's like, do you know anyone who speaks Punjabi? Because you needed to decode a couple of
Yes.
I don't know exactly what you were.
Yeah, there is a transcription project which requires listening to interviews in Punjabi and transcribing them. you know. So there again, language comes into the picture.
Exactly.
Because history speaks in different languages,
Uh-huh.
And I think that also teaches you something else, something remarkable, that uh, the fact that history speaks in so many different voices and in so many different languages is perhaps antithetical to very homogeneous ways of thinking, by which I mean, we often tend to prioritize, we often think that history should serve certain nationalistic purposes, my nation's history, and uh, my nation had a glorious civilizational history, or it was the best, or whatever. I think history humbles us by forcing us to think in diverse, distinct ways. So I think that's also another aspect that I'd like to flag, perhaps, for your audience.
Are you thinking about, do you have a particular experience in mind where history humbled you? Or are you talking about, or did you say that like generally?
I was making more of a general point, but I think this is a point that the historian Ramachandra Guha also makes in this brilliant essay which is called History Sans Chauvinism.
She shuns chauvinism.
History without chauvinism.
History without chauvinism.
History without chauvinism. And he kind of emphasizes this point: a pluralism in methodology, a pluralism when it comes to sources.
So having multiple sources, having multiple methodologies,
sources, having multiple methodologies, and also the point that I made about languages as well, kind of makes you realize that history is very ill-suited for chauvinistic purposes, for xenophobic purposes. Think of today, when there's all sorts of talk on social media about how we were great, and foreigners kind of sullied our civilization. And we must somehow bring in legislations which expels foreigners. It's been our experience, it's been this nation's experience, or the civilization's experience, that we've also been enriched by, people from different faiths and different cultures coming in. So, and we can't neglect those aspects of our history as well, right? So I think that's something that we must keep in mind. That history does not lend itself to chest thumping.
What does that mean? Oh, literally.
Yeah. So, it's more complex, it's more nuanced, and it does not lend itself to the kind of crude nationalism that some people would wish that it lend itself to.
That's simply cherry picking, right? In that sense. I mean, I think in all histories, you'll find moments of greatness and just moments of tragedies committed by the same group of people. So you can't claim that this group is the best, this group is the worst or something. But it's way more complicated than that.
Yeah.
When I arrived at Ashoka, 2 months, I'm 20 by the way. I took a gap year and I repeated the grade. So when I arrived at Ashoka, I was very clear of what I wanted to do here. And I mean, not in terms of what I want to major in, but the fact that I want to use every opportunity that I can get. It's why I try to talk to as many people as I can. It's why I'm doing this podcast right now. And it's why I just fill my time up with things that really matter to me, right? The thing is, when I talk to my peers, other first years, or even second, or even fourth years for that matter, I see a lot of them being hesitant to participate in activities, to sign up for that club, or to enroll in this competition. So there was this TCR meeting, the Comic Relief is a club which I'm part of. And during one of the meetings, they were like, okay, who all wants to audition for this role? And a bunch of people raised their hands. And there was this another girl there, and she was a bit nervous to raise her hand. And she's like, I could tell that she wanted to do it, and she even said it later. But, so I'm like, I'm not going to name her, but apna haath uthao, just raise your hand and just try it out, right? Just see what happens. And she's like, nah, but I don't know anything about acting. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly the point. That's what I'm telling you to try it out. Because you don't know anything about acting. So how do you know whether you'll be bad at it or good at it, or that you won't like it? And it's very easy to think right now, okay, it's just one opportunity. I can do it next year or next semester. But I think once you get out of college, or maybe once you're done with your education, you realize the missed opportunities, or the fact, you realize the extent to which your life now lacks those opportunities, because this is a time where you're filled with different competitions and events and all. And usually people don't want to take advantage of that because they're anxious, or whatever. So how did you ensure during Hindu college that you got the most out of your time there, or did you not do that to the fullest extent?
I think I'd frame it rather
Differently,
differently,
huh?
which is that I guess I didn't share the Ashoka undergraduates' anxiety of making the most in terms of being very utilitarian. Also that I want to get the most out of this
Experience.
experience.
Yeah.
Right? I think I kind of was more relaxed as an undergraduate. I was not that cutting edge.
Uh-huh.
I didn't structure my time so specifically as to make sure that I had to land this internship or do this course,
Right.
extra course, or I think things kind of happened along the way as well. Not that I didn't try to give shape to my college life in certain ways. I was involved in different activities. I was part of the quizzing society. I was part of the English debating society, which I served as the general secretary. So I did kind of engage in these extracurricular interests. But I think I didn't have the kind of anxiety that a lot of Ashoka undergraduate students have. Also because perhaps, there are two different frameworks that you're functioning in. One is a public university.
One's the most expensive
One
private
is
university in
yeah,
India. Yeah.
I think my annual fee at Hindu college would perhaps not even be the pocket money of a lot of Ashoka students. It was 10,000 rupees for a year. First year at Hindu college. The first year fees,
Holy
I remember.
shit.
And I think might have increased to 12,000 or 13,000 by the time I was in third year.
Uh-huh.
But I think, I should also make allowances for the fact that the pressure that an Ashoka student faces, perhaps, also because, he's not the recipient of subsidized kind of state-funded education.
Yeah.
He's paid a lot for it. He or she has paid a lot for it. They're more like consumers in some way, and the university is more like consumers or customers. The university is like a service provider.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore that anxiety is justified. At the risk of sounding old, I'd say my time was different.
I mean, he's just 26.
But yeah, there was that, and I think there was another thing which I must admit, which was that as opposed to a system like Ashoka, where there's a definite emphasis on academic excellence, both in the kind of courses that are offered and who offer those courses in the first place.
Uh-huh.
You have the best of faculty, you have great resources, you have writing tutors and all of that. None of which we get at a
Public university.
And we also had very different experiences. We had I remember a professor who abandoned us for an entire semester because he wanted to contest an election in Bihar.
He just left.
He went on leave,
Uh-huh.
and the college didn't even find a replacement for him. So as a result, we were left without a professor for a course for an entire semester. And we were secretly hoping that he wins the election and leaves us because he was not that great a teacher. But unfortunately, he lost. So yeah, I think academically, Delhi University was not rigorous at all. But most of the learning happened outside the classroom,
Uh-huh.
in the sense that you met peers who did not share your background, who did not share your privileges. People from all financial groups. I remember a student who's now an assistant professor in a Delhi University college telling me that I can't take the metro, I take the bus because the metro is too expensive for me. You had students who could only write the exam in Hindi because they did not know English, and they faced a paucity of resources, paucity of academic resources. So you became sensitive to those kind of perhaps people and their concerns in that environment, and by having conversations with them, you would get to see another point of view. Whereas, I mean, while there is some kind of diversity in Ashoka, socially it's largely homogeneous.
Or even financially.
Yeah, even financially.
So was there a surprise for you when you came here? Because if we're talking about financial people from different financial classes and social groups out here, like you said, it's largely the same group of people that are here, that come to Ashoka. It's the rich, wealthy, 0.01%. I did the math. It is 0.01% of people financially that come here, and there are not many people that come from lower income backgrounds. In fact, on this floor, I was talking to someone who is here on 100% aid, and they talk about their apprehensions about mixing with or trying to talk to people of different financial backgrounds, because it's kind of nerve-wracking when people around you talking about taking a trip to US and you're thinking, "Ki, I can't even afford that." Right? So how do I even talk to these people? So clearly that's lacking at Ashoka. Do you feel like that's a huge disadvantage for people here because they're so far away from reality?
There are a couple of things I feel. One, Ashoka is like an island because the university is not connected with
Anything.
with its environments, with its surrounding environment. Let's say, there's no Delhi University. You step out, there is the city, there's lots of other things to explore and all of that. Outside, there's nothing. Everything that you explore is inside the campus, right? Secondly, and I've met students who are I've interacted with them, even befriended students who are on 100% aid. And from what they have told me, one made a very interesting comment. He said, "We don't interact with the Sodos." And I said,
South Bombay?
yeah, Sodo being South, yeah. And I couldn't figure that out initially, and then I realized, oh, he means South Bombay, South
Delhi, yeah.
Right? So, and then there's another student who's on full aid, and he says that he's also from a disadvantaged social group, and he's a marginalized social group, and he says that there is slight discrimination at Ashoka. Not slight, there is discrimination at Ashoka in the sense that people might say hi to me, but they won't come up and talk to me, or they won't sit with me, let's say, when I'm having lunch or dinner. I don't know how much of that is a function of their financial background, the fact that they're on 100% scholarship, or their social background. That's hard to say. I can't pinpoint that. But there's definitely that discrimination felt by some students. And I think that compounds the kind of isolation that they feel. Undergraduate life, I must say, is tough enough because you are faced with the rigors of academic life and university life. You also have to. There's also this. I won't say anxiety, but there's also this desire to meet new people and make new friends. And so it can get lonely, but discrimination compounds that loneliness and that isolation. So my heart really goes out to those students who face.
Did you feel discriminated at Hindu college? I don't think so.
I didn't. I think I didn't because I was English speaking. I came from a city.
Yeah.
Also I came with relative cultural capital. My mother was a journalist. My father was a professor. And which also reminds me of something that another friend of mine told me. He aspired to join the civil services because he came from a backward caste. And he said, "Madhav, you won't realize that I'm the first generation college goer. I'm a first generation college goer.
First in the family to go to college.
First in the family to go to college. And for me, it's very important to clear the civil services to gain respect and to gain that kind of cultural capital which you take for granted. You by virtue of your family having years of education take certain respect for granted, which I kind of yearn for. Me and my community yearn for. Because also backward castes are stereotyped in different ways.
Right.
So yeah, that point really kind of that point did have an impact on me.
A lot of the kids that I see at every college is going to be, every group of people is going to be a mixed bunch, right? You're going to find people who are of this class or this type, not even class, this type. You're never going to find the perfect group, so to speak. But interesting. I have a question for you. Let's say we have a student who is trying to decide between Hindu college and who's trying to decide between Ashoka. Ashoka obviously is pretty expensive, but this student gets aid. So the 100% aid, let's say. So they aren't paying a dime. Maybe they even get a stipend, which a couple of students here have gotten. And they still have the option of Hindu college at DU. Of course, this is a very generic question, but if you were in their shoes, then what would you do?
I think I would definitely choose Ashoka if I was getting 100% aid.
Uh-huh.
I was even getting a stipend because things were very different back then. 2014, 2015, Ashoka had just come up.
Yeah.
So you didn't know how that project would pan out.
It just started, yeah.
It just started.
Yeah.
Now it's obviously, it's completed 10 years. It's fairly well established. And the kind of opportunities that it gives you. Unfortunately, Hindu college cannot. And also because the scenario has changed dramatically.
What do you mean?
In the sense that the current dispensation is invested in almost destroying our public universities.
What does dispensation mean?
The current dispensation means the current government. I don't
Oh,
want to say the
government, right.
current government. And, not that I want to turn this into a propaganda, but is almost invested in
your view.
In my
you don't
view,
want to
in
get
my-
him cancelled.
in my
Yes.
view, is invested in really attacking publicly funded education through its policy.
Interesting.
By the kind of people that they're appointing. People of a certain ideological disposition are being appointed as professors. Their kind of merit is not looked at, their qualifications are not looked at. And so there's that aspect as well. So I definitely
Would pick Ashoka.
I definitely pick Ashoka. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me. So one of my family members, I want to keep her anonymous. But that said, I just said her. So I suppose I'm doing a terrible job. But she used to write textbooks, and she was, during the conversation, she's like, so we used to write, if Ram has 10 coins or something, then how many does this person have? And she's like, of course, because we can't use Muslim names, because she used to write for a particular textbook publisher. And she just said that casually, as if it's so self-understood and so normal. I'm like, that's more interesting. Forget what you just said though about the Muslim name thing. But so that really clicked with me. About the opportunities thing, I remember a lot of kids at the start, they had a lot of offers. So they got into Ashoka, but they were still waiting on offers from SRCC or other colleges. And whenever I talk to people outside of other colleges, I think they really underestimate the amount of opportunities you get here. Not that you don't get these in other colleges, but in my experience, every single day I have like 10 emails, this competition, this thing, apply here, participate in this. From your own experience, you're an archive person, you work in the archive department, that is. Compared to other universities in India, what do you think about the opportunities that Ashoka gives a student and the atmosphere of Ashoka in general to cultivate a well-rounded student?
I think let's start with the basics. I think you have some of the most amazing faculty here at Ashoka. And you see those members of the faculty really committed to teaching in the first place. Right? Because they've spent years and years in their chosen field. And they speak out of a certain conviction, out of a certain passion and love for the field.
Yeah.
Which is rare which creates a very conducive environment for learning. So that is one. Two, I think you also see a lot of student initiatives in Ashoka, right? I recently came across a report which was authored by, I think, a history student regarding archaeological excavation.
Right.
There's a center for archaeology at Ashoka as well. And there's a reading group that student also runs, which does great work, in fact. So there is this scope for student initiative as well. There's also, I think, great flexibility. This concept of ISMs, for example. You can design your own
course essentially.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, ISMs are independent study modules. So you can do an ISM under a professor. So for example, ISM under history, and then you can pick a certain niche in history that the department does not offer a course in. So you can essentially design your own course under that professor. So yeah.
So I think all of these kind of features make Ashoka just a wonderful place for academic exploration, for studying, for also nurturing your personality. But yeah, there remain drawbacks as well.
What do you think is the biggest drawback here?
The drawback remains, I'd say, the lack of a real diversity. Whose mode of living perhaps goes against conventional liberal norms.
Such as?
So the students that I know,
yeah,
who who are very strict when it comes to certain religious observances, and therefore they are made fun of or mocked at.
For example, Jains don't eat pyaz and garlic. I'm assuming that's like a thing.
Yeah, and also the way they appear, they wear a certain outfit.
More religious, more ethnic.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
mala apparently.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
I didn't
so
know
how
that.
do they also end up feeling a part of the Ashoka community?
Yeah, they
Why?
can't.
Because Ashoka is sensitive to certain kinds of difference. If you're queer, if you're trans, and rightly so, they're more receptive. They're very receptive to those kind of concerns. But how do we also become receptive to other kinds of difference? Are not in congruence with certain liberal norms. So by the mode of their dress, by the fact of their ritual observances, by the fact of their background, and where they come from, and all of that. So how do they also feel more included? These are very implicit things as well. People can be kind ostentatiously to such people, but they won't like to befriend such people.
Yeah, I know.
For want of perhaps not appearing cool, of being ostracized by their own social group or peer group, And so I think that also remains kind of an area where the Ashoka community needs to self-reflect.
I think that comes with a lot of maturity. So I suppose Ashoka is more liberal in its values, but it's quite ironic that even though they claim to be liberal, or many students here claim to be liberal, they aren't that accepting of more traditional or conventional values or acts or practices that a lot of students here engage in. So my roommate is religious. But he's religious, he's heavily religious. I'm not religious. And we've had conversations where we're arguing about why God exists. He argues why God exists, and I'm like, no, God does not exist. You're delusional. And we've had those conversations. But at the end of the day, we still are able to live with each other. We still are friends. We've agreed to disagree. As the
that's great. That's how it should be,
Right.
But there should be healthy engagement in the first place rather than stereotyping.
Exactly.
In some cases, there's just stereotyping and not enough engagement.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
Interesting. Madhav, you also been to graduate school. Kyun gaye bhai grad school?
So, simple answer. I thought that I had got enough out of the Delhi University system. It could not give me more than that. And therefore, I needed to do more learning.
Right.
And therefore, I made the transition to... I had the opportunity of either pursuing my master's in Delhi University. I had got a good rank. I think I ranked 3rd in the university.
Overall?
In the entrance, yeah.
Jesus.
And... or I had an offer from SOAS as well. So I thought, why not give that a shot? SOAS
is University of
the
London.
School of Oriental and African Studies, affiliated to the University of London, but now it's just known by its acronym, which is SOAS.
So you picked SOAS, and you MA'd in South Asian history.
Yeah, in modern South Asian history.
In the Amritsar Nights of 1915, I think, or 1905.
So the entire title of my master's dissertation was Student Protests and Resistance in Colonial Amritsar and Lahore from 1918 to 22.
1918 to 22, right. I was talking to another master student. He was actually my TF for my mind and behavior course last time. And he did his MPhil and theories of mind, basically. That's what he did his MPhil in. And he was telling me a grad school is way different than your undergraduate school, than undergrad. You have way more independence, which is a good thing and can be a extremely bad thing as well. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of students just go into grad school thinking that it's the next step, it's what they have to do. And they don't really know what to expect from grad school. And when they get that, they're like, oh, this is not what I thought it would be like. So can you share some of your experience in graduate school, how it's different from undergraduates, and share some wisdom that prospective 3rd or 4th years should know before they head to graduate school, especially in history?
I think perhaps an Ashokan undergraduate would be much more equipped for graduate school abroad than I was. Because the manner in which we operated in Delhi University was that our assignments were quasi-plagiarized. In the sense that we were only expected to pick up, certain sections from different books and readings and assimilate them and write an assignment.
Right.
The expectation was not that you'd come up with an argument of your own, which is what you're taught.
Yeah, thinking originally.
Originally, argument of your own, and then coming up with evidence to support that argument.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not taught to think independently and think originally and think critically. Therefore, initially, when I remember for this course on Islam in South Asia, I had an assignment and I just summarized the historiography on the Mughal Empire. And my instructor said, but what do I do with this? What is this all about? Where is the argument? And that really set me thinking that, I had to do some thinking of my own.
Yeah.
So that was one. Two, there is a lot of, I think, emphasis on writing itself in Ashoka. You have an ecosystem which supports or which really emphasizes academic writing and how you go about it and how you go about analyzing arguments and all of that.
Right. We have a department for writing.
You have a department for writing as well. None of that was there in Hindu. Yeah. So I think one major learning that I had from SOAS was that it taught me how to write. By pushing me to think originally, and with all the comments that I'd get for each assignment, you don't get that kind of feedback, honestly, in the undergraduate system in Delhi University.
Right.
There, every professor would examine even a 1,000-word book review and look at all your commas and full stop and give you detailed feedback of where you went wrong, what you could have done, what are the aspects that you examined, and all of that. So I think
so what facts you got wrong, or what
maybe what facts, or maybe errors of argument as well, perhaps.
Right.
How you could have improved on a particular argument, how perhaps you missed out a specific set of a book.
But the emphasis was not on putting out an argument and supporting it.
Yeah, how you got a particular emphasis wrong and all of that.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of training was very productive for me. It was only after I completed my master's from SOAS that I actually started writing as well. If not academically, at least for digital dailies and other platforms. And,
right.
Right. So
I have a question. So it's very interesting to me when, just like any other Indian male that wears glasses, I was preparing for the JE because that's a rite of passage that my people go through. So, and my justification for that was, well, IITs are the best colleges in India. IICs are the best colleges in India. TU is the best university in India, has the best colleges. Therefore, you have to go to these institutions. But then when I talk to people who've been to these colleges and have been to other universities as well, they tell me that the teaching faculty there isn't the best, really. They don't teach you how to think, which is what I think an education should equip you with. Why do you think that is? I mean, you're getting into the best colleges, rank-wise, at least in India, but then it's not teaching you how to think. So why is that?
I think that's a big question. 3 or 4 decades back, some of these institutions had the most stellar professors. They had professors, and even there are still some departments where the odd professor or so can really, shampoo your brain and force you to think in different ways.
I have no clue what that meant from means.
I just came up with
shampoo your brain.
Yeah.
Please explain.
Shampoo your brain in the sense, really kind of force you to think differently.
Okay.
Yeah. So but that odd professor is not the norm.
Yeah.
And that's also because the quality of appointments has gone down. I think there's lesser commitment to teaching in the public university system because they feel now they're not attracting the best students.
So they're driven more towards research.
They're not even producing the best kind of research. That's the sad part. There is, for want of a better word, a lack of commitment, to teaching, to the taught,
From the institution and teachers in general.
From institutions and from teachers.
Yeah.
But the fact was that some of these public universities were visualized as centers of excellence by their founders. Think of JNU and its Center for Historical Studies. It had the finest historians.
Yeah.
Sarvapalli Gopal and Ramila Thapad and K.M. Panikkar. And you name them and they were there. And they've trained generations of historians who you pick up, you look at faculty pages at history departments abroad. You're bound to find a professor or an associate professor who was trained at Jain, for example. But that's no longer the case. That's no longer the case because now people are being appointed based on their ideological affiliation and their merit.
As you mentioned earlier, our
As I
current
mentioned earlier,
government does not exactly support free thinking.
Yeah.
Counter that by not taking down this video. But that's interesting. So I'm thinking about doing a master's degree if this podcast doesn't work out. So just in general, what's it like to do a master's compared to doing an undergrad?
I see change.
See change?
First, you're managing everything on your own, from cleaning your toilet to buying your groceries to washing your dishes.
That doesn't sound that different from, okay, my life is a bit different, okay.
Yeah. I at least was not used to that. Because I lived in a PG and you had your food.
Oh, you didn't live on campus?
Yeah. I lived in a PG, you had your food taken care of. There's a cleaning lady who would help you with the cleaning and all of that. You weren't engaged in everyday labor. So
that's preparing you for the life if your master's degree does not work out.
So there is that labor of living,
Right.
That
labor of living. Wow.
That also to kind of sustain yourself on a daily basis, you need to engage in. There is that academic workload, which is quite a bit because the taught component is very less. Undergraduate, there's a lot of teaching which happens.
Yeah.
On average, you have 5 to 6 classes every day. At the master's level, I probably had 3 or 4 hours of classes a week.
Oh, that's not much compared to undergrad.
Yeah, and they expect you to put in most of the work yourself in terms of doing the readings.
So there are less courses. Less classes.
There are less classes.
Class time, but more work on the set.
Yeah,
that you have to put in.
And you have to manage yourself. And sometimes, you can spend some of that time perhaps binge watching something and not doing your reading.
Yeah.
There's no one to hold your account because there's also most of the evaluation which happens on the basis of assignment. It's not like you'll be tested at the end of. There'll be a semester end examination or something. Although that is true for some courses, but usually the norm is that you're judged on the basis of assignments. So work you largely you're left to yourself. So
it's pretty much transitioning to complete adulthood.
Yes, it is. And the third component of it is the social life. My sense. See, I feel I kind of transitioned to grad school at a time when I was very socially awkward and intern.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore,
you were 21 back then. I'm assuming
21.
Okay.
21. And I felt I needed, perhaps in retrospect, I feel I needed more life experience before I entered grad school.
Oh, more life experience, like working, interacting with more people,
or traveling, or interacting
that
with
kind
more
of
people, all of that. Because I was very self-conscious, and I would sometimes sit in the junior common room and think, oh, but this is my classmate. Oh, but would she even remember me from the class?
Should I
go and
something
talk to her or not? And that conversation would keep happening in the head without actually me saying hi.
Doing anything,
And then the other aspect was I never drank. I was a teetotaler.
Teetotaler, I don't know what that means.
Teetotaler means someone who does not drink alcohol.
Oh, I call them someone who does not drink.
Yeah, someone who...
Very ease of language, yeah.
Yeah, someone who does not drink is a teetotaler. So, and a lot of social life in London revolves around the pub culture.
Oh.
You go for a drink and that's where you get to know a person.
Yeah.
You interact and you talk and you
like at a bar perhaps. Okay.
Yeah. And in case you go to parties, a couple of parties I went to, and in case you're not drinking, the other person feels judged because they think
not enjoying yourself.
You're not enjoying yourself, and you feel judged because they think that you're not drinking, and so it's a strange kind of an awkward kind of situation, right? So that was the second, I'd say, barrier. The third was also I realized that I'd made a transition from having a very close group of friends and having like a good gang in Hindu to now expecting that I'd be able to make a similar kind of
group at London,
which does not work. Friends, they're a little more than acquaintances, because the thing is, there is more regularity and consistency in undergraduate friendships. You are part of the same societies and clubs, you attend the same classes, you go to the same places and all of that. Whereas here people are pursuing their different courses and they have different timelines and schedules,
Yeah.
and you're trying to fit people into your time, in your schedule and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So navigating that kind of social world was something that I was not equipped
Uh-huh.
for.
Yeah.
So I found myself rather lonely, and I think I've spoken about this on a podcast as well, where I don't know, summarize my time as rather uh, rather pessimistic sense. My time in London is lost and lonely in London, or something that kind.
Lost and lonely in London.
so yeah,
I
that
love
was
the
one
alliteration.
aspect of it. But I think the other was also that I traveled a bit. I mean, not extensively. I traveled a bit
Uh-huh.
on my own as well in London, and I got to explore a lot of heritage as well. I mean, the heritage buff that I am. So
Yeah.
visited a lot of museums and galleries. Got a
Uh-huh.
student art pass made, so that I had free access to most museums and galleries. So I explored that. I think, yeah, my time in London, I don't know whether it was well spent or not. I really feel in retrospect there could have been much more to that experience, but it taught me some important lessons.
I think it taught you to have to use whatever future experiences you have. Try to use them in such a way that they're the richest experiences that you can possibly have. That's such a terrible phrase. What I mean is, future whatever experiences you have, you try to get the most out of those experiences. I think that's what you learned
Maybe
from
yeah,
London, perhaps. Yeah. I remember when I took a gap year, my parents are I got admission to good colleges and in outside India, and because my parents are financially well off, they could afford to send me there, which is what they said at least. And I'm like, I want to take a gap year. I took a defer year technically, but that's a different story. So I took a gap year, and during my gap year, I was very focused on just working on myself. Maybe a project, maybe a book that I'm reading, just doing things myself, right? And I felt like I was rushing into college. I felt like there was a lot I had to experience and learn before I even started undergraduate years. And the day I started college, I could see its benefits that second. Because, first of all, when during my gap year, I was extremely just by myself. I don't have any siblings, and all my friends were off to college. So I spent just months with just myself in my own head. And while that may sound very lonely, it was to an extent, but it taught me so much just about myself and people in general. And I think it's because of that I can do that I can walk up to people and ask them who they are, what they did, what do they do, and stuff. So I think, would you say that if you would have taken a gap year before masters, you would have gotten a more richer experience of living a master student's life?
I think that would have definitely helped me. Anchored me. He would have,
Anchored you.
Yeah, anchored me in the sense that there was an anxiety on my part back then that I have to follow this straight track from bachelor's to master's to PhD. And as it turns out, that wasn't true. That was not supposed to happen, or that didn't happen. So I think I would have gained some perspective that you can pace things and you can do them differently as well. You don't need to do them sequentially or in a linear fashion. So I wish I had that foresight back.
Taking a gap year. So to students who are just rushing into masters, because I talk to third years and fourth years, and a lot of them are planning on doing master's degrees or PhDs. And when I ask them, well, why do you want to do a PhD or a master's? They usually either go blank or they default to the answer that, well, that's what you're supposed to do. Or on their part, I just see a lack of thinking. I feel like they can talk to more PhD students or master students just to see what it's like before they commit themselves to a 2-year or 5-year program, right? That's a huge time commitment. So to those students who may be 21, 22, as you were, what would you say to them? Or maybe hesitating to take a gap year, or maybe hesitating to do that, I don't know, go to a tour or something, travel a bit, or just to try out something that they haven't before. What would you want to say to them? If anything at all.
I'd say that if you have a definitive sense of what you want to do at this juncture, then maybe you should think more about it. I think the only certitude in life is that life challenges our certitude.
Oh, that's nice.
So we might think at the age of 21 that, you want to specialize in a particular field. But gradually we realize that, we're meant for something different. And therefore the one trait which I'd emphasize that all college students should cultivate is that trait of openness to what life throws it, openness to changing your own, changing your own point of view and changing your own beliefs and conviction. And a certain openness to others as well, being receptive to
different perspectives,
and learning from the experiences of others, while at the same time reassessing and reevaluating your own experiences as you go along.
Right. So be more open-minded, I suppose.
Yeah.
And taking whatever is useful, listening to other people, and taking whatever is useful and fitting that into your own framework of thinking around. Interesting. You also touched upon social anxiety there, that you did a master's program at a point in your life where you were a bit socially awkward, socially anxious. And you talked about your experience, which I'm sure a lot of people have shared with, just sitting next to a girl and thinking, does she remember me from class? Should I talk to her? All of those things there. I'm sure a lot of people have been through, especially straight guys. So I remember there was this one time in school, in 10th grade, because I did my schooling during COVID. I used to have lunch alone because that was the only quiet time I'd get, and I needed my headspace. So actually, no, I did not have my lunch alone. I used to have a lunch with a group of friends. I don't know what I'm saying. And there was this another group of friends, and I don't know, they were having a really interesting conversation one day. I'm like, I want to jump into this conversation. This seems so interesting. But I'm like, I was so hesitant. I'm like, should I walk over there? Would they think I'm weird? What if I said, okay, can I just sit with you guys? What would they think of me? And all of that nervousness and anxiety. And now looking back at it now, I was thinking, bhai, just do it. Kya farak padta hai? Right? Now I'd give that person a hug right now. So that's one of my experiences with social anxiety. But to you, did you kind of overcome that to some extent during your master's degree or after it, perhaps?
I think it took some time. So I think one aspect of it was just being confident in who you are, perhaps. And I think what really helped me was that as I started writing, and as I would get feedback from people, about what I was writing. Some people would drop in a mail, maybe, and write to me. They really liked it. It really touched them or whatever. That contributed some, restored some degree of self-confidence. That was one. Two, I think, the pandemic years were pretty bad because, I'd gone from being away from home for 4 years to having to live at home for almost a couple of years. And,
when did you do your master's again?
So I finished my master's in 2019.
So you started at 2017, I'm assuming 2018.
2018, yeah.
2018
September is when I started my master's. 2019 September is when I finished my master's. End of September. And then I came back. And then, I worked for I interned for The Wire for a bit. Started writing, mostly freelancing. But I was at home for a better part of the years before I started working at Ashoka, which was in 2022 of September. And so, that was a tough time in the sense that I'd been away from home for 4 years. I was used to my own space, and, I felt that my freedom was curtailed while being at home, and, the pandemic compounded that because you couldn't go out and you couldn't interact with people or talk to them. So I think a lot of that which I regained was when I really started working at Ashoka, perhaps.
The sense of independence and
so Ashoka helped me in multiple ways. One is it restored my sense of independence. I now had my own space. I now also developed a community of my own. I've been able to forge friendships with even undergraduate students, and
hopefully I'm one of them.
Yeah. So with teaching fellows and PhD students, and I resumed playing football here. I used to follow Arsenal at one point in time, but I'd lost interest along the way because of other commitments.
Yeah.
And I started following the Premier League again. Connecting with different aspects of yourself. Ashoka really helped me save me from my quarter life crisis in some ways. By giving me a sense of purpose, giving me economic independence, giving me a job that I love.
Loved. Past tense there.
That I love. Sorry. That's a slip.
I'm kidding.
Giving me a job that I love, because for most people, archiving must be boring, but I think it's pretty exciting for someone who loves history. Trawling through old documents and getting to read about new subjects every day is something that I love, and I love communicating that passion to other people I encounter as well, and telling them about archiving, what the archives are exactly. So I think Ashoka has done a world of good to me that way, and I think I've honed my social skills here, perhaps, and also I've become more comfortable in my own skin.
Right.
And that has happened with age as well. That has happened with faltering, falling, failing, learning, all of that.
The first thing you said when I asked you the question is knowing something along the lines of knowing who you are and having your confidence in yourself. In my experience, the only reason I have confidence, that sounds so arrogant, that I have confidence is because I know what matters to me and I work towards those things. And so I know the story of who I am. Therefore, whenever I interact with people or do anything that people might say is will make them feel conscious, I'm like, well, it doesn't matter to me what people think because I already know who I am, right? So it's not going to matter what story they tell because I know that the real story is right here, the one that I'm writing. If I asked you, right, so who would you say Madhav Nayur is? Because that's a question that changes every time. But as of now, who would you say you are?
He's a humble archivist. He's an Arsenal fan. He's a Carnatic music enthusiast. He's a Gandhi fanboy. And I think that kind of sums it.
You mentioned when we were talking, we just having a conversation, that seeing Gandhi and reading about Gandhi and the fact that someone can be socially awkward at this, in the youthful years or even their adulthood for Gandhi, and get over that or overcome it or become better at dealing with people or talking to people was really inspiring for you, and that was the first point of connection that you had with Gandhi. So when I was reading Gandhi's autobiography, which you recommended, there was this episode where I was talking to you about just now, where he was at a non-vegetarian restaurant having a vegetarian dinner with his vegetarian friends, and it was Gandhi's kind of farewell. He was moving back to India, I think, and he had prepared a mini speech that he wanted to give. It was very concise, and when he got up, he just couldn't get a word out, and so he just abruptly said, "Thank you for accepting my invitation," and then he just sat down because he was so nervous. And then he had this moment in court as well. I think it was his first case where he went in the court. It was his turn to speak. He just couldn't utter a word. So he just sat down. He just went out of the court. And his client lost the case. That was his first court case as a lawyer. And when you continue to read the book and you see how far he came, he started to give public speeches and all. And that obviously contributed to him earning the title Mahatma, although he never really liked the term Mahatma or Babu. But other than that, what makes you connect with Gandhi? Because usually the youth of today, at least our generation, does not really connect with Gandhi that much. His values seem too foreign, or they seem like, I'm not certitude, what's the word? They seem like platitudes. Right. So people find it very difficult to connect with him, especially the youth. So just on that, what are your views on general on Gandhi, his values, and the relevance his views have in today's, in our lives, in our generation's life?
So I think there's one of two approaches that you can take to this question.
Uh-huh.
One is, as a very prominent Gandhian scholar states, it's not the burden of dead people to be relevant. So it's we who make up these questions of relevance and legacy and how they matter or why they matter. Perhaps they don't, Perhaps, as you say, no one bothers about them. But at a second level, if you were to think about the kind of things that Gandhi stood for in his life, probity in public life.
Probity.
Probity is a certain degree of transparency and accountability and scrutiny. The
Give me an
fact
example, yeah.
the fact that people could criticize him for whatever decisions that he took.
Okay, freely. Yeah,
Freely.
yeah.
You know, there was certain openness about the kind of life that he led.
Mm-hmm.
Even his so-called experiments towards the end of his life were out there in the open, people to judge, scrutinize, all of that. So things like honesty, probity in public, and non-violence. We can come to the question of non-violence later. Why it matters, perhaps, and also a relationship with the environment which was not based on exploitation. An ethic of environmental sustainability. So when you think of all of those things, they have a contemporary resonance, and then you start thinking, whether Gandhi can be a reference point as far as these questions are concerned.
What do you mean?
Because he thought about these questions quite deeply during his lifetime. He practiced, put all of these principles into practice during his lifetime.
Yeah.
And therefore his life and work and thought have something to say as far as our contemporary predicament is concerned, right? As far as our current state is concerned. Take the question of climate change, for example, and living in a more ecologically sensitive way.
Yeah.
Perhaps learning from Gandhian principles, a very, very small way in which we can perhaps implement a Gandhian principle would be kind of trying to reduce wastage. You look at the mess figures which are put up every day.
Insane.
In terms of how the amount of food which is wasted.
Out here, yeah.
And how many people that amount of food can actually feed. It's a staggering number. So there's that. There's also that Gandhi also, I feel, represents the ability to engage in dialogue with those who do not share our. And we go back to that point about Ashoka communities need to reflect and engage with those who perhaps do not live by or subscribe to liberal norms.
Right.
As one historian, as one scholar put it, Gandhi had a dialogic imagination.
Dialogic, is it from the word dialectic?
From dialogue.
Dialogue. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Trying to be non-adversarial even with the so-called ideological adversary.
Yeah.
In conversation or dialogue. So I think all of those fronts, Gandhi continues to be a very important thinker.
Relevant person, yeah. I think just because something happened in a time that was way different from yours does not make that thing irrelevant. And when I was reading Gandhi's book, I think what really stood out for me was his honesty. It is so hard to be honest with yourself. I don't think people realize that. But to be honest with yourself, you first of all you can't run from your thoughts. You have to confront your thoughts no matter how uncomfortable that might be. And then that's what honesty is. Accepting whatever thoughts you have, whatever inhibitions or whatever emotions you have, and then analyzing them and working on them. That's the reflection part. And what stands out in Gandhi is, in his autobiography for me, is at least he writes things as they are, at least that's how it seems. And he criticizes himself on things that he did wrong. And then he also talks about how he can improve these things. Or maybe he talks about, I haven't found a way to improve it yet. So I think you wrote in one of your articles that Gandhi is a deeply flawed man, but what makes him great that he's aware of those flaws and that he keeps on working towards them. So he was maybe terrible is too harsh. Okay, according to me, he was a pretty bad husband.
Yeah.
And fatherhood, to bhul jao. But so he was a terrible father and a husband, but in terms of serving the public, or he was the best we've gotten yet, I'd say. I'll go as far as to say that. So, in general though, what do you think today's youth can use from Gandhi? Take away from his life, perhaps, maybe a story of his.
I think, in fact, I've also written about this, about what young India can learn from Gandhi. I think 2 or 3 things, I'd say. Uh, First, Gandhi always used to say that, all his decisions um, or would go back to uh,
He,
listening to this feeble voice within, the small voice of his conscience. He was a slave, ultimate slave to this voice within. And young people today, when they're confronted by tough decisions, uh, sometimes fall prey to, social media fashion, sometimes peer group pressure,
other
sometimes what their other voices, what their
Yeah.
parents says. If they can develop the capacity to come back to their own self,
to trust themselves.
to trust themselves, and listen to what their feeble voice says,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's something, that's a great power to have. One can call that a power. Right?
Yeah.
Second would be Gandhi's emphasis on abhaya or fearlessness, which was almost like a religious virtue for him. But going back to, this young, self-conscious, inward-looking man who found it difficult to even give a public speech, relentlessly working on himself. In Hindi, one could say कि उन्होंने अपने स्व को एक प्रयोगशाला में बदल दिया. He turned himself into a laboratory.
Mm-hmm.
He's an experimentalist par excellence. He experiments with diet, with clothing, with with a host of other things. So I think by relentlessly working on ourselves and having this spirit of self-improvement, imbibing this spirit of self-improvement, we too perhaps can become fearless in different ways. So cultivating that fearlessness is something that perhaps young people can learn. Third, I think, would be the dialogic spirit. Having conversations with peers rather than shutting them down or rather than cancelling them. Having conversations with peers who think very differently from you.
Yeah.
Patiently listening to them. Remember, Gandhi was someone who gave his critic almost as much or even more space in his papers. The papers that he'd published, Young India, for example.
To criticize himself more than others.
Yeah. Or if others would criticize them, they'd get proper space in his paper, right?
Yeah.
So, developing that capacity as well for dialogue, for debate, for discussion, for dissent, I think that's another important virtue that young people can learn from Gandhi, among a host of others.
Yeah, I think instead of approaching conversations to prove that you're right, approaching them from the sense, oh, this person has a different opinion than me, and I want to hear them out, because if there's a mistake in my if there's a contradiction in my theory, then I want to correct my work. Instead of approaching them, oh, I want to prove them wrong. Hence, I will engage in conversation.
Yeah, the other has something to contribute as well. If we approach dialogue from that perspective, remember, Gandhi never said that I have a monopoly over truth.
Yeah.
He never said that. He said that truth is something that we arrive at through this process of, through constant self-improvement, through constantly working on the self, and through a spirit of dialogue and reconciliation with others.
Yeah.
Right?
And he was quite ruthless about finding the truth. So when he was starting to become a devout Hindu during the early stage in his 20s, and when he went to London and South Africa, he engaged with a lot of Christians, people from different faiths, and he would listen to them very carefully. He would read their religious books. He would learn a language just to understand a particular religious book, and just to see if the Gita didn't give him the truth, then the truth might lie in some other text. So he was quite ruthless about that, finding what the truth is. And so these personal differences between him and people, he didn't see them as things that he needs to bring to the day of light and show the world that they're wrong, but rather there's something that they know that I don't, and I want to learn that, because that will help me in my search of truth. You touched upon self-improvement there, and I don't know, just thought of a interesting question. So when a lot of my friends tell me about the things that they're doing to improve their lives, maybe it's going to the gym, or maybe it's learning an instrument, or maybe it's starting to read more, or maybe it's starting a side hustle. I feel like, and then I ask them this question is, so the question I usually ask them is, what's the work that you still have to do to become the person that you want to be? So for you, what does that work entail? For me, that is simply working on my projects that matter to me. and keep on learning mainly STEM related stuff and talking to people?
I think my view of myself or my ideal self has also changed, in the sense that I earlier visualized an ideal self that I had to work towards. Whereas now, perhaps I'm more content with who I am, and I rather work on gradually acquiring, adding more things to my kitty. Perhaps uh, uh, now, for example, uh, I wish to publish in a peer-reviewed journal. That's the next project that I have. Um, but I do not link that to a particular type of person that I am constructing. I don't know how I can rephrase this for better, so that your audience understands.
So you're not striving towards a particular version of Madhav.
Yeah.
You're striving towards just a goal that matters to you.
Yeah.
And Madhav, yeah.
Yeah. There's that Cartesian statement, I think therefore I am. And some philosopher said, Isn't I am enough? So I think that now my orientation is towards seeking joy in very small things. Very little things. If there is a text that I like, perhaps reciting that text. If there is a verse that I like, perhaps chanting that verse. If there's a book that I enjoy, perhaps reading or rereading that book. If I enjoy writing, perhaps writing a paragraph a day. Not with the aim that I'd be published somewhere, that I'd be the best author, that I'd, just make it.
Yeah.
But just taking joy in these small acts, that's become my orientation now. And I don't know if that's the best, but I think that's the best for me. Works the best for me, right?
Right. I think when I think about all the moments in my life where I've been working towards something, as in, let's say I used to be really overweight when I was younger. 14, 11, 14, 15, 15. So that was the first major insecurity that I had, my weight and my looks. So when I started exercising and when I started changing my diet and eating habits, my goal was to look a certain way. And I remember being miserable because I'm like, I have to have this kind of body. I have to have a six-pack. I need to have that V-taper, the puffed up chest and all. And I was miserable. I was following my diet, kind of, but I was still miserable. I remember it was to the point where I was eating one meal a day, which is not, and even that meal barely had 500 calories when I should have been eating 1800 at least. But now when I go to the gym, or now when I exercise, or now when I follow a healthy diet, I feel much more fulfilled, simply because it's more in line with, because I enjoy exercising for the sake of it. I enjoy cooking and eating healthy food. Of course, I still want to get stronger, but this time I'm doing it for me because it's important to me, not because I want to show other people that, this is the Vedant. This is Vedant. I'm simply doing it for myself. So, on that note, you started Charkha classes.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting. For those who don't know what Charkha is, can you explain to them?
So, Charkha is the spinning wheel on which you spin yarn from spin cotton yarn. Spin yarn basically.
Yeah. So, you can.
From a spindle, put the spindle in the spinning wheel and you.
And then the thing goes round and round like shit. I don't even know how to explain it.
Just
Google Charkha, yaar, please.
But I think I was in first year of college, and I was always a bit of a Gandhi fan, and I thought that I read about this Charkha certificate course that Gandhi Bhavan in Delhi University was offering. So I enrolled myself for Charkha classes, and I think I've written about the Charkha instructor there, Cheeta Bhimrao ji. Who retired as a Hindi lecturer from Kamala Nehru College. And remarkable lady, spent her entire life propagating Gandhian values. She said something which has stayed with me always. She said, Charkhe ka uddeshya hamari Drishti ko Nirmal banana hai. The purpose of the spinning wheel is to enable us to cultivate a more pure vision.
The compassionate, empathetic
which translates into this pure vision, really translates into a more empathetic, compassionate way of looking at things. And, in my own way, I've tried to cultivate that Nirmal Drishti by being more receptive and more open to other people, and learning from them.
Can you give me a specific example of where you actively tried to do this? Just an example where this quote came in use to you.
I have a friend
Uh-huh.
who has rather rigid views about their own faith, which I might find a little out of place. But nevertheless, I think I tried my level best to understand where they were coming from. What their reasoning was.
Why do they think the way?
Why do they think the way they do? What underlies their conviction. I mean, I didn't agree with what they had to say, but I could develop some understanding at least of where they were coming from. That really enriched my own understanding or my own perception of faiths different from mine. In the sense that, I realize that it's very easy for us to apprehend people of a different faith through metrics or through certain stereotypes that we might cultivate because of our own.
Did you do that with this friend initially?
Initially, I did, but then I realized that because of the environment that they've grown up in, because of the factors that they've shaped them, because of their circumstances, they have those views. And therefore, from a position where I felt that wherein I was almost contemptuous towards those views, I was able to move to a position of certain respect for them. And I think that is what Nirmal Drishti does in some ways, If we are able to cultivate a certain degree of respect for views diametrically opposed to our own, it leaves us enriched in some ways.
What's the hardest view that you have to listen to, perhaps, or just at least I've had these moments where I'm talking to someone and they just have the most silliest view. I'm using silly is a euphemism here. I'm not using the word that I want to. But I listen to them simply because I know that they think differently from me, and that it'll be very irrational for me to dismiss that belief simply because it does not fit my set of beliefs. That's irrational, and I'm not acting rationally there. So I try to understand where they're coming from. For you, what's the most, I don't know, perhaps irritating belief that you had to?
A lot of beliefs which are aired on YouTube by different, some podcasters as well, where they propagate a certain version of history and try to present themselves or these so-called experts as saviors of dharma or all of that. That's kind of difficult to digest. And, my only response to that is people who say that so-and-so religion needs saving and so-and-so civilization needs saving, perhaps need saving themselves, they're the ones who really are the people from whom faith systems and civilizations should be saved in the first place, so that's my take on that. But yeah, it's difficult to kind of it's difficult to come up with very considerate responses to outright bigot, propaganda, hate. And unfortunately, the way the social media ecosystem is wired, hate sells much more than
negativity is always
thoughtful
more
responses or thought through and thoughtful responses, and just some very sane stuff.
Exactly. Social media is built to push out the most clickable content, and it happens to be the case that the most clickable things are the most negative or have the most BS. So I wouldn't say that it's the best place to have a rational discourse. I mean, just look at Twitter. I got my next thing, so I'm gonna just use some other question that I have. You talked about during undergrad years, you were on your way back to college, I think, and you saw this injured cow, and you made sure that you called the cow helpline. First of all, I didn't even know we had a cow helpline. That is insane to me that we have a cow helpline. I mean, हमारे देश में पिज़्ज़ा 30 मिनट में आता है, एम्बुलेंस 2 घंटों में आती है, but we have a cow helpline. And you called the helpline, you made sure that the cow was safe. And
called the cow helpline, got the cow ambulance, got inside the cow ambulance, then took a round of the campus, spotted that cow, and got that cow treated.
God. Dude, I mean, that just throws away all the compassion and empathy I've ever exercised in my entire life. I mean,
reason also being, I think devotion for not devotion to the cow, but I think my care for the cow comes from the fact that I heard the story about my great grandfather who actually went to Ludhiana Central Jail because he was part of that group of people who had surrounded Parliament calling for an anti-cow slaughter law, and then he was
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think he was roughed up by the police and all of that. And he ended up in jail. And a very ironical story. He died because the cow that he had cared for, nurtured for, hit him with her horns. And after that, he couldn't take the injury and he passed away. But that's that story apart. That story apart. That story apart. I think I don't know. I have perhaps a soft corner for the cow. I just saw an injured cow and I thought I should get it treated, and that's what I did. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So let's rewind.
Yeah.
Okay. Your grandfather,
Great grandfather,
great grandfather, Par Dada, saved a cow.
No,
Essentially, advocated for went against the anti-cow slaughter law.
Yeah.
He got jailed for that, and then he came back to his regular life after that. He cared for a cow.
Yeah.
And the cow that he cared for hit him.
Yeah.
Like smacked this into him.
Yeah.
बहुत हो गया तेरा. ज़्यादा घास नहीं दे रहा.
So yeah, that's
the ironies.
Yeah, can make for an interesting or satirical or humorous short story maybe, but I don't know.
It'd be pretty ironic if that's how you go. I mean, dark humor is my thing, by the way.
Yeah.
It's gonna get way darker.
Yeah.
But it's funny because on my first or second week of campus, I was talking to someone about how Ashoka can be a bit homogeneous, and they're like, "अगर तुम यहाँ किसी को बता दो that I don't eat beef, or that I feel like cows are sacred," and they'll immediately be, "Oh, this guy's a very right-wing Hindu. होना ही पड़ेगा उन्हें." And the funny thing is, I felt the same thing. I'm like, if someone tells me that I have a soft spot for cows are very sacred, I'd be like, this guy must be a very Advent Hindu or a right-wing person. So it's pretty surprising for me to find that I have a lot of my biases as well. And so, with that said, are you religious? I'm curious.
I'd say I'm religious.
You've given this a lot of thought.
I'd say I'm religious, but not in the very ritualistic sense of the term. I don't pray daily. There are very few rituals. I don't go to the temple very often. Very few rituals that I subscribe to. I perhaps do the annual Diwali puja at home. But I think I'm religious in the more thinking way of being religious.
What do you mean?
In the sense that even within Hinduism, there is what I'd like to call the thinking man's Hinduism.
The thinking man's Hinduism.
And the thinking man's Hinduism is, basically the Hinduism of people like Gandhi and Vivekananda and these figures, Ramana Maharshi, for example, who say that, certain aspects of tradition which are abhorrent, you're free to reject them. Why subscribe to that? So
that's the part of this thinking man Hindu's philosophy.
Yeah.
So you feel free to reject the parts that are abhorrent.
Yeah, that are abhorrent, that do not are not in consonance with an egalitarian outlook, for example. So I think reject those aspects. And if your predilection is more for towards philosophy, then you need to indulge in ritual all the time. Maybe it's about reading texts like the Gita or the Upanishad.
I have a question. So let's say there's a religion that says, well, it's okay to reject parts of the Gita or the Bible or the Quran which you deem to be, which are abhorrent, as you said, which have no relevance today, which are just completely go out of line with the morals today's society lives in. Then why do you need religion in the first place? If you think about
That's an interesting question. I think
if the book keeps on, if you're free to mend the book the way you want to, amend the book, then why do you need the book in the first place? Let's just write a new one.
I think we need to delve or dwell on the question of the very specific nature of what I'd call Hinduism, for want of a better word. It's a polycentric faith.
Poly means many, centric means center.
It has multiple centers. It is not conceptualized in the way that most Abrahamic faiths are. That they have, it does not have a specific book, it does not have a pope, it does not have a church, it does not have commandment, So you're free to pick and choose. It's like an open source software. You can choose things and design your own Hinduism. That's how I see
That's
it.
nice. It's Linux.
Yeah.
Hinduism is Linux, okay.
That's how I see it, Some people would disagree very violently with my very liberal characterization of what Hinduism is. But you can look at it that way. It gives you the freedom to look at it that way. It gives freedom to the believer.
Perhaps.
Right? And then why do I end up believing in it if I can amend it to that extent? It's because it has a certain very deep resonance with me, which is inexplicable, perhaps, which perhaps cannot be explained in the most rational terms. So even though I might reject this project of the Ram Mandir, Ram itself has certain associations in my mind, certain resonances, which really move me.
Like certain emotions, certain ideals.
The vocabulary and the belief system that has nurtured my religious imagination has a certain kind of resonance with me, which is difficult to explain. And that is why I hold on to it. When I think of Rama, I think of Tapasvi Raja Ram. Tapasvi Raja means the ascetic king Ram. The ascetic king. He's a king who's also an ascetic. He goes into exile, right?
Yeah.
So I think of Tapasvi Raja Ram. I think of the equanimity that Rama had, despite all that afflicted him.
What is equanimity?
Equanimity is to not be affected by outward circumstances and to maintain a sense of balance.
Sounds like being rational.
Even in the face of adversity.
Okay.
So
being detached?
A certain degree of detachment.
Or would being rational be more accurate?
Rational would be a reductionism.
Okay.
Detached, yes. Certain sense of balance, even in the face of adversity. If someone were to say something to you, you might be affected. But if you say, that does not affect me. I have samabhava, is equanimity again.
Yeah, so that value in Ram.
When I think of Rama, I think of all the Rama bhajans that I've heard growing up, Naam Ramayana, Kapivara Santata Samsrata or something. Those associations come back to. So in that sense, while the text or the scripture is not above life, शास्त्र जीवन से ऊपर नहीं है, जीवन शास्त्र से बड़ा है. But that dharma gives you certain belief systems and gives you certain wisdom, which stays with you.
Right.
And it is for that wisdom that you turn to these texts. That you might reject certain parts of it, but certain parts of it will speak to you. So I think that prajna is the word, Sanskrit word for wisdom. And the ideal in the Gita is that of the sthita prajna. That is one who has equanimity is the one who has access to all the wisdom.
So one who is unaffected or is rational in the moment where something bad is happening, kuch bhi ho raha hai.
I think the shloka in the Gita is Nirmana moha jitasanga dosha adhyatmi nitya vinivritta kama dvandvair vimukta sukha dukkha sangyair gachyante mudha padmavyantat dvandvair vimukta sukha dukkha sangyair. Dvandvair vimukta, the one who's free from dualities of joy and sorrow and
good
pain
and bad
and pleasure and all of that. Sukha dukkha sangyair, to one to whom joy and sorrow are one. So I think that kind of wisdom that these scriptures give is very instructive in some ways.
It's interesting to see how I had this attitude or belief that religious people cannot think freely or as freely as non-religious people can, because in my experience I'm not tied to a book, I'm not tied to an ideology. I'm tied to science, but we are able to think more freely because I believe in just rationally using a deduction system to deduce certain truths. I'm not tied to the Gita, Quran or whatever. And religious people can't do that because they have to pick. That used to be my attitude, but it really surprised me when I came here and I talked to people, and I found that religious people are not just more mature, but they're more free thinking than my atheist friends or agnostic friends. But in general, was this attitude of yours that you can pick and choose the good parts and remove the discard of the bad parts? Did you get this later on in your life, or was this cultivated from the start of your childhood?
I think I developed it gradually. It was more ritualistic earlier. And my relationship with God was based on fear in some ways.
Oh, what do you mean?
Fear that I was not good enough. Fear that I was praying to you because, there's something lacking in me. And then that relationship gradually changed to kind of love for God, and then also a kind of inquisitiveness about God.
Right.
To the extent that I became comfortable with this idea of the divine. without there being a certain dissonance with my other position, So, for
Give an
example, I
yeah.
could believe in, the kind of God that I believed in was a compassionate, empathetic entity, which helped me be more compassionate and empathetic in my life. So, my humanism was kind of drawn from my faith.
Yeah.
And it meant that some of my earlier positions, which was a certain degree of fear toward people of, let's say, different faith system or different background, changed. I became more open to forging friendship across
with people in different faiths,
different faiths, different backgrounds, different social groups, all of that.
Yeah.
So how your relationship with the divine changes also changes your orientation towards people, perhaps.
Do you believe that Ram and all of these gods actually existed, like about the earth?
So that is not the point.
No, just in general, though, I'm curious.
That is not the point at all. For me, it's not even a question.
Oh, what is that?
I say that because if you were to reduce Ram to the king of a small kingdom, then he'd be a mere footnote in history. He has much more appeal as a cultural icon, as the epic hero of Ramayana. He fires the cultural imagination of people across the country. So I don't think that our God should be reduced to history. I think the history myth conflict or dualism is not ours. It's I think, for want of a better word, it's really not a dualism that we should get trapped in. When I think of Ram, I think of all the Tyagaraja kritis. Tyagaraja is this is considered to be part of the Trinity. Was a musical composer of Carnatic music. Is part of the Trinity of Carnatic music, and he was a great Ram Bhakta, and he's supposed to have composed a lot of devotional compositions and kritis on Rama. So those come to mind. See, Rama occupies a special place in my heart. It's in my Antahakarana, is the Gita would say. Antahakarana is a word used for conscience and heart and all of those things. Mix of those things. So he is above all else the emperor of my heart's kingdom, and that's enough for me. I don't need to consecrate a number of temples for him. All of that.
Yeah.
As long as I'm able to pray to my Rama in the confines of my home and perhaps chant Ram Nama, that's enough for me. Yeah.
I get that.
Why does he need to be a historical person for me? Even if he did not exist in history, and only the name Rama existed, even that would have been enough.
I think what bothers me about religion is just the fact it's one thing to claim that Ram signifies all of this for me, these ideals, these values, these stories, they really help me get through they're important to me, right? That's one thing to say that. It's a completely different thing to say he was a physical human being that walked the earth, that flew this chariot and all.
Yeah.
Those are two very different things, and surely people understand that as someone who's into science, whose main interest lies in physics. Scientists are ruthlessly trained to test every claim that they make.
It's true.
And without that, you can't say that X is true or Y is true. You have to test it empirically. If you can't test it empirically, if you can't prove it empirically, it does not exist. And so people surely must understand the skepticism people such as scientists have towards religious claims, or claims in general, like this person existed, or what's the evidence? Oh, because we found this piece of rock. Well, how do you know that the piece of rock has any relevance to him? And even if it did, how do you know that the existence of one piece of rock does not prove the existence of another human being? So, my question to you is: do you hold this view that Ram was a physical person, though?
No, I don't hold the view that Ram was a physical person. I don't.
Right.
I think we do not. The debate is futile to kind of prove that Ram existed or Ram was born.
Right.
The very fact that we have this great cultural corpus called the Ramayana.
What does corpus mean?
Corpus is the body.
Okay. Is that a Latin word?
I'm not too sure.
Okay. Sorry, yeah.
We have this great cultural corpus in the form of text and performance and stories called the Ramayana. I think is a fact enough which should be celebrated and appreciated, and also kind of provides for other possibilities. You spoke of skepticism with respect to religion, right? I think there are possibilities of skepticism within religion itself.
What do you mean?
in the sense that the idea of God within Hinduism has been debated for quite long, right? There have been schools of thought within Hinduism which have denied God, the Charvaks and the Lokayats, for example. So I think those more work needs to be done on those skeptical traditions. And I think the Hindu tradition was one which welcomed debate and skepticism and dialogue. The sad part is that there's been a closing of the Hindu mind, wherein, we just need to thump our chests and say, oh, all of us are Hindus and everything is good at the end of the day. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
We need to think about our faith more deeply, interpret it in light of the needs of the time, and reinterpret some of its ideals to make them consonant with the present age. So I think that also needs to happen. There is a hymn in the Rig Veda called the Nasadiya Sukta, which says, who created this world? Did God create it? Or maybe he didn't, So that radical doubt did exist, or does exist, that tradition does exist. Or at least a possibility that tradition exists. But it's not been tapped into as much as it should be.
Does it bother you when you see just how religion is being weaponized, at least in today's world, or especially in India? I see all these people and they're like, people say that they're Hindu just not to be proud of their faith, but instead to say that we're Hindu and therefore, this Muslims, Christians is the wrong kind of faith to be aligned with. So they say that they're Hindu to demarcate themselves between other people, instead of being proud of the fact that they have instead of being proud of the values that they have. So it's used as a tool to separate rather than as a tool to unite. Does that bother you?
Yeah, that bothers me.
Because Ram is close to your heart. So
no, that bothers me the most. That's something that I'm deeply worried about. But I don't know how to combat it or how to deal with it.
One person can't do it. Not even.
No, but maybe conversations like these are a starting point, perhaps.
Of course, yeah.
That we can do, the conversations that we can have on campuses, maybe gradually. But this is something going back to Gandhi. Another thing which really speaks, another Gandhian value which speaks to the present day is communal harmony and communal amity.
So communal harmony. Okay, so
harmony between different religious communities or communal harmony. That man sacrificed his life for that ideal, right? And here we are, kind of targeting people of faith different than ours. In the name of bigotry or dharma or because xenophobia, whatever or whatnot. So, we are willing to group together as Hindus and thump our chests. But we won't, let's say, perhaps, group together to save a Muslim man on the street if he's being lynched. That's a sad reality. More than him being a Muslim man, he's a fellow citizen, firstly.
Yeah.
But you won't view him as a fellow citizen because, your sense of Hinduness sees him only as Muslim.
It's like he's a Muslim first and then human.
Yes.
That's the other way around. Yeah, he's a human first. And
yeah. So Gandhi really tried to nurture that sense of Hinduism, which was more receptive, accepting, inclusive.
Yeah.
He had these interfaith prayer meetings. And the sad part is that Muslim extremists thought that he was sided with the Hindus, whereas Hindu extremists thought that he sided with the Muslims.
Quite ironic.
Yeah. But we do not have political leaders of that caliber who are willing to make communal harmony into an issue and a movement of sort.
It's not their priority.
It's not their priority.
Yeah.
It actually needs to be a movement.
They're working against
there
it.
There needs to be grassroots mobilization. Perhaps creating, as in the time of the independence movement, there were Congress Seva Dals, for example. Why can't there be more Shanti Dals? Why can't we educate people about the importance of communal harmony, mobilizing for peace? Because peace does not sell, violence does. So
this reminds me of that poem. मैं हिंदुस्तानी मुसलमान हूँ. Yeah.
Hussain Hedri.
Hussain Hedri. So for those who haven't watched it, just search मैं हिंदुस्तानी मुसलमान हूँ on YouTube पे तेरे को मिल जाएगा तुम्हें. But just as an ending note, so I think young people are quite impressionable, as I am. Why do I keep saying young people? I'm a part of this group. We're quite impressionable and even gullible. I mean, you're young as well, by the way.
Thank you for the validation, Vedant.
So I think इस age पे एक चीज हम सुनते हैं and then we're like, this has to be correct. We don't use our thinking we don't use our mind to analyze the thing, break it down, and see if it actually makes sense. So we just adopt beliefs, whatever beliefs were given, right? And I think this can be particularly dangerous in the time we're living right now, because as you talked about social media, violence sells, controversies sell. Especially when it comes to religion, it is extremely easy to mobilize a group of people by using religion. To such people, or just to people, young people in general, I'd really like them to think for themselves. And the hardest part about thinking for themselves is can be you have to learn how to reflect, self-reflect. At least in my experience, I don't know what would you say to these people in general. For example, my advice would be to not whatever advice someone gives you or whatever someone says to you, don't take that as an objective truth. Think about it for a while, practice it, see whether it works or not.
And whether you can apply it in your own context or not, whether it speaks to you in your own context or not.
What do you mean?
In the sense that a lot of people have this habit of expounding truths and wisdom which might not apply to you,
At least not in this stage of your life.
Not at this stage of your life, And, they might be very didactic. For example, I see this obnoxious Supreme Court lawyer telling young people, oh, you must read more about your scriptures, you must read more about Hinduism, you must become more Hindu, all of that. It's actual nonsense, Not supposed to apply to you. Take to things only if they speak to you, if they appeal to you, if they appeal to your interest, if you have an inclination for it, Don't do anything under coercion of any kind, no matter how persuasive someone might sound. But if their advice does not speak to you, then feel free to reject it or have the
guts to think for yourself. Interesting. Madhav, thank you for this podcast of swearing out so much time for just the third episode. But I'm starting a tradition on this podcast where the last guest leaves a question for the next. So Madhav is the first guest that gets to do this tradition. So you're going to write a question for the next person who's going to be on the podcast.
Sure.
By the way, this is not an original idea. I copied it from Diary of the CEO. Thank you, Stephen. But your podcast is pretty good. I'm sorry. Your ideas are just way too good. So I have to use some of them. But here's the notebook, sir. कोई भी question हो सकता है for the next guest. And I don't get to see it.